everybody, and welcome back to the Moviescramble podcast. We have a special treat for you tonight, not just because all three of us are in attendance, but lo and behold, we've actually all went to a cinema for the first time in about 5 months, and I'm not going to lie, I absolutely loved it. But before we speak about that, let's see how everybody is. John, how are you?
Good. Things are the same as they ever are. Let's face it, nothing's really changed in the last couple of months apart from actually getting out to a cinema. So that's a small mercy in the face of Scotland just about to lock down again. So
yeah, well, they can stop me from going to somebody's house all they want. They can shut the pubs for all I care, as long as just keep the cinema open for at least another month.
Yep.
Mary, how have you been?
Well, I'm in one of the bad areas. So I live in East Renfrewshire, so I'm now under some sort of semi-local lockdown or whatever, but I'm with you, Simi, as long as the cinema stays open, then that's all I care about.
Yeah, I don't think you're affected, are you, John? Not to give your location away to your legions of fans who might stalk you.
Not yet. MacArthur Towers is not in the catchment area for lockdown quite yet, but we are adjacent to at least 2 of the areas, so I don't think it's going to be very long.
I'm just wondering,
I thought you had your own postcode.
Yeah, his estate's his own local authority area. Well, as we've been saying, we have been back to the cinema, and lo and behold, we all went to go and see Tenet. Now, this is a film, whether you like it, love it, hate it, had no idea what the hell was going on. It's cinematic. You need to see it in the cinema. It's just, as a blockbuster, it really deserved to be seen on the big screen.
You want to crash a plane, but not from the air. No, it's so dramatic. Well, how big a plane? That part is a little dramatic.
Now, this is a tough film to really kind of discuss without giving away too many spoilers, and I'm not even too sure what is a spoiler and what isn't, because I went into this film having seen half a trailer completely cold, but the official synopsis on IMDb says, armed with only one word, Tenet, and fighting for the survival of the entire world, a protagonist journeys through a twilight world of international espionage on a mission that will unfold in something beyond real time. This gives away absolutely nothing of the plot. Now, I don't know how much he's going to mention because, like I say, the trailer doesn't give away a lot, but within the first 5 minutes, it tells you the premise of the movie. So it's not really a twist as such, but I'd like one of you try and explain that.
I'm still not sure I understood it, if I'm being quite honest. I feel very ill-equipped for this podcast.
John, you're very smart. How would you explain the plot in as vague a term as possible?
It's a spy story more than anything else, but it has elements of thrillers and it has a sci-fi element as well. Again, this is very difficult to talk about, as you guys have said, without giving too much. I think we're going to have to maybe mention some elements just so that we've got something to actually talk about. Otherwise, it's just going to be dead air. But then again, we could go back and sort it again. Now, there's a wee hint for you as well, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. It starts off as an action film. There's an action scene at the very start of it, which you see a little bit of that within the trailer, which is set at the Kyiv Opera, I believe. And like you said, Thomas, that gives some of the premise to it. And from there, the protagonist, who is called either the American or the protagonist, it's John David Washington. He's never given a name. And it's basically his story as he uses the word Tenet and the interlocking fingers symbol, which you see an awful lot, sometimes very subtly, sometimes not so subtly, in order to work his way through this mystery of something that's happening, or something that has happened, or something that might not happen. That's about as clear as you can get it.
Yeah.
I do find it quite interesting you mentioned the fact that that John David Washington is called the protagonist in the film. I didn't even notice he's never referred to by name until I checked the credits afterwards. We're doing prep for this podcast. I think that's a real testament to the movie as well, that you don't even notice it doesn't have a name.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't. I don't know if yourself, Mary, did you notice?
I noticed that he made a point of saying it several times during the movie, I am the protagonist in this story. And I kind of thought at one point, I was like, is that his name? And I was like, don't be so thick, Palmer. He's just saying that. But then, like you guys, when I looked up afterwards, I was like, oh, he was literally saying that that's what he was called. But yeah, I don't think it needs names. It's, it's, as John said, it's a spy story. It's kind of surrounded in mystery, and whether or not you can work it out is, testament to your own intelligence. But I don't think it needs names, or even like, silly code names or anything like that. The sort of Tenet and hand gesture is enough to sort of signify there's something else going on there. And I don't think you need to know that John David Washington's character is called, Mr. Smith in order for you to enjoy the film more.
I 100% agree. And the fact that you say it's not a code name, it's not what they say. They don't refer to him as the protagonist throughout the movie.
Yeah.
Like it's like 007, for example. We'll get back to that in a minute. But it's just he refers to himself as it. As being the protagonist of this story, and I did pick up on that, but I didn't even realise that he's never mentioned by name, which really does like play on the spy aspect of it. Unlike James Bond super agent, who's always undercover using his own name, which I've never understood in a decade of these movies. That not
He's
one
the most
person.
well-kent spy there is.
Yeah, it's something about Bond. I recognise that name. Is he not that super spy who's always going undercover? I mean, the arrogance of that man. They won't even change his name for a mission. But, I mean, this movie, as we've kind of touched on without getting into too much detail, it is totally mind-melting in terms of the plot. It's really fantastic. As you mentioned, John, it's got a lot of sci-fi element. I don't think it's really worth trying to work out too much. I think it's best just enjoying as a spectacle. Would you agree?
Yeah. I did a little bit of background digging because I wanted just to know where the word Tenet came from, because for the first 6 months of seeing the trailers, I kept mispronouncing it and calling it Tenant, which was obviously it's like a Scottish beer, so it's not the same thing. But apparently it comes from a Latin palindrome, and it's a stone that's been carved, and no matter what way you tip the stone, the words all read the same way. So there's I think rotas is on there, opera, tenet, and a couple of other words that are actually used throughout the film as people's either names or locations. So that's as far as I went in terms of digging, but I just like to know little pub quiz things like that just in case.
Which is quite genius when you think about the actual plot in the movie.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Okay, we can't really talk too much about the plot as such, but what about the performances? I thought the performances in this movie were fantastic, especially Washington, Robert Pattinson, and Kenneth Branagh, who I think is just excellent in this role.
Oh, I'm going to disagree slightly. I felt like he was chewing the scenery a wee bit towards the end, old Kenneth Branagh, but I did enjoy, he's the sort of, Russian supervillain or whatever you want to call it, but I did think towards the end he was getting a little bit more theatrical and over the top, and it kind of took me out of the story a little bit, because although it's not, hyper realistic, it was kind of flowing in a certain way, and the performances were all quite subtle and quite nuanced, and then as he got sort of bigger and more hyperbolic, I was like, oh, actually you're kind of taking me out of this a little bit.
Really? No, I didn't get it at all, especially in relation to the plot of his master plan. I think he was allowed to ham it up a little, considering I mean, yeah, let's just cut to the chase. It's really a James Bond movie with a sci-fi element, and you've got the supervillain, and all James Bond supervillains have their own ideas of world domination. Kenneth Branagh's Andre Sator has got an incredibly ambitious plan when it comes to world domination. It's totally comic book, and it's dastardliness. Like Les Luthor could dream is something that's insane. It's totally off the wall, mental. So based on that, I'm quite happy for him to kind of ham it up a little, because hey, his plan is the most insanely evil I've ever heard of a bad guy. And it's very selfish as well.
Yeah. If you think about it as well, at the start of the film, maybe for the first 2/3 of the film, his character is totally in control. He knows exactly what he's doing and the way that the events are unfolding. It's only in the sort of the last act that he doesn't really know, so therefore his character changes subtly. He's not the same confident person, so therefore it's a bit of a bravado and everything coming into his performance to reflect the fact that he isn't quite sure of what's actually happening anymore, which I thought it's one way of reading it. Another way is saying, yeah, just he was completely hammy, of course.
Yeah, totally. He's very cold as well. He's very brutal. There's a scene with, again, this isn't a spoiler, but with his wife, Kat, played by Elizabeth Debicki, but there's a scene when he's going to he threatens violence on her. And I remember watching that scene feeling very, very unnerved by the cold and calculated way he did it. And I couldn't help but think, is that based on real domestic abusers? Because there was something just dead realistic about the scene that really made me feel uncomfortable.
I
Yeah, it was
imagine,
quite full on. Yeah.
yeah, I imagine he's very thorough in his research. So you could be onto something there. He probably has maybe watched, I don't know, tapes or something like that. But I mean, I liked him in it, and I really like him as, like, I always think he comes across really well. I just thought towards the sort of maybe the third act or whatever, he just kind of took me out of it a little bit. But then I didn't particularly enjoy the sort of last 20 to 30 minutes of the movie, so maybe that's kind of played into it as well. I thought it was like Bourne meets Bond meets Inception up until that point, and then the last sort of bit just kind of lost me a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I like him, and I liked his character. Well, not liked his character, but thought he was good up until that point.
It was very, to me, it was almost like a spiritual sequel in Inception at times. It was very similar in the tone and just the overall feel of the movie, I felt, compared to other Christopher Nolan films. But yeah, I loved the ending. It was just that whole spectacle idea of it, and there was so much happening that I was just transfixed to the screen. I had no idea what was going on at times, but I couldn't look away.
There was a sort of a statement of intent at the very beginning, because you're kind of thrown into the film. You're given no preamble, you don't know what's happening, and it's just a massive big action scene with people wearing gas masks, and their faces are obscured and all that time, so you don't know who's actually doing most of the running about and shooting and stuff. And sometimes you don't actually know what they're saying. Now, I'm sure we'll have a wee discussion about that in a couple of minutes. But it throws you off guard, and it never really changes in that way. There's very few times during the film where you're actually spoon-fed information. There's a couple of characters who do that. They're specifically there for that. I'm thinking of the Sir Michael character, the MI6 character played by Michael Caine. And there's another couple of them who they put in small pieces of information. But if you're not paying attention, you will not pick up on it, and you won't understand things that are happening later on in the film, basically because they're not telegraphed to the audience in any way. They're put out there, but it doesn't seem to be the most important part of the conversation. Like, if you think about the conversation that the protagonist has with Sir Michael, they're sitting down having a meal. Well, Sir Michael's having a meal, and there's all this information getting passed back and forward, but at the same time, you're distracted by the fact that the waiter's really snobby and he's mildly racist at the same time as well. So that's kind of distracting you from what they're saying. So unless you're really tuned into it, then you're going to miss certain things, and you're going to be going, why are they doing that? Where it's actually very clear that they've done that. Now, I only got that because I've seen the film twice. And in the second viewing, I was able to pick up on certain things that I missed in the first viewing. And I thought I had pretty much got it sorted after the second viewing, until I came out of the cinema and my son said to me, he said, "Who was that character at the start?" And I was like, I don't know. I've got no idea.
I must admit, I got really distracted during that Sir Michael scene because I couldn't stop watching Michael Caine eat chips. I was like, wow, that guy's literally just turned up, got a massive paycheck in a Nolan film, and he's just sitting eating a plate of chips. I want that guy's life. And then I was like, no, pay attention, because it's one of these films that from the outset, you know you're going to have to work for it. But yeah, there is so many things that I think are, as you say, John, sort of designed to distract you from the information that's been given. Maybe that's to prove whether or not you're a good enough spy, if you pick up on the main points of the sentence as opposed to going, wonder if those chips were cold.
It's all very well saying that Michael Caine has earned those chips. He was in Jaws Revenge.
I am not arguing that. I'm not arguing that. The guy is obviously there for a paycheck. Do you know what I mean?
But I mean, that's the thing about this film. I'm not going to turn around and tell anybody that their opinion of the movie's wrong. If people don't like the film, they don't like the film. I just think this is a film that you cannot make from an opinion on, liking it or not liking it based on one viewing. I think if other people put the film and say they didn't like it, may enjoy it more a second time. Now, that's why I kind of contradict myself, so I did like it first time. It could be that I watch it a second time and go, actually, these things, the gaps are filled in. I didn't like it. But it's definitely something that merits repeat viewing, because that's the premise of it in many ways. It's meant to be something to watch more than once. which is quite clever for a blockbuster as well, because it's saying go to the cinema again.
Let's be clear, this isn't a blockbuster film. This is an art house film that's just got a massive budget. The ideas that are in it and people who are actually starring in it are not totally sort of big names. I mean, John David Washington heads up the cast in this film. He is not a massive big star by any means. Robert Pattinson for the last 10 years has been doing small indie films. It's not a cast that you would automatically say, yeah, top notch. There's no Tom Cruise or anything in it. That's what I'm trying to get at here.
Regarding Robert Pattinson, actually, I'm interested to know what your thoughts were on his performance, because he seems to be the guy who's now, retrospectively, everyone's favourite actor after seeing the Batman trailer. Have you noticed that? Everybody all of a sudden was a fan of Robert Pattinson. Was always a fan.
Oh, 100%. And listen, I've watched only a couple of movies that he's done. I watched A Good Time and I forgot what the other one was called, I can't remember. But I really liked him in this movie. I actually turned around to Chris at one point because he was getting out of a car and he had the suit on and the hair was all slicked back. And I was like, oh, that's a Bruce Wayne move. Like, I felt like it was kind of like there was something about him that all of a sudden I noticed his stature and I noticed how well he carried himself. And it's probably the first time I've kind of looked at him and he's been really polished in a role in terms of like how he physically looked. But I really enjoyed his character. I thought he was almost like, you know, a kind of Puck in Midsummer Night's Dream. He was this sort of like mischievous peripheral character who would sort of drop in little bits of information here and there and always had a little cheeky smile on his face. So you never really knew if you were getting the whole story from him or not. I really liked his character. I thought he was really good.
Yeah, I really liked him as well. He based his speech manner in the movie on Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah,
I thought it was quite an interesting wee fact. I'd like to go out. I would go back and see the film anyway, but I've been looking out for that because I'm quite a big fan of Christopher Hitchens. And it's interesting you mentioned this film being like an art house movie with a blockbuster budget, John. And I don't know if you've ever seen the film Primer.
I have, yes.
Which, yeah, that's very much a indie art house movie, but it had similar themes to this.
Oh, that'll be another one for the list of things that I haven't seen compared to you guys.
Sorry, John.
I think it was the BFI. They had put together a list of maybe 5 or 6 films that you should watch before going to see Tenet, and Primer was one of those films for the themes that it actually had. Yeah, and I could fully understand why they did that. It does play in a similar way to the film.
Yeah, and Primer's a very good movie as well. It's pretty dark towards the end because it starts off quite light in a way. It just gets dark towards the end, but a very good movie. But in terms of the blockbuster, the freeway scene, that's incredible. It was absolutely incredible, and especially when you read how they did it, it makes it even more. When you look at the magic behind this movie and how they did a lot of the scenes, I'm sure I read there's no green screen used. There's less visual effects than any other Nolan film or blockbuster Nolan film, and yeah, it's mostly practical, and it's just like, how did you do that? But you know how he did it. It tells you. But to pull it off, it's a filmmaking technique. It's absolutely incredible. But that freeway scene, I was just totally hooked the entire time. And it's not that difficult to kind of figure out halfway through what's going to go on. That's not the point, really, at that point. It's not that this film does keep you guessing towards the end. Things do get quite predictable. But just go back to that spectacle idea. It's just a total treat for the eyes when you're watching it. It's thrilling. It's really exciting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt like I was like bracing myself in the seat because you're watching obviously the cars shoot along and there's various kind of stunts and stuff going on. I literally was going like, oh my God, and holding on to the edge of my seat. I probably just because I haven't been to cinema in so long and I was just so excited. But you're right, it is a total spectacle. And you know what, whether you get it in inverted commas or not, it is something just to behold, to look at the sheer craft of actually creating a piece of cinema like that is, as you've just said, you know, virtually no green screen. It is just practical effects. That's incredible.
Yeah, the stunts and the sort of stunt sequences have to really stand up because you do get a view of them more than once in this film. So if you didn't think they were good the first time around, when you see them again from a slightly different angle, then you would just be like, oh, this is really boring, and it would totally drag you out of the film. But like you said, there's enough going on. It's very busy. All of his stunt sequences seem to be very, very busy. So you can pick up things the second time that you didn't see the first time. And obviously it's taken, as I said, taken from a slightly different angle as well. It's very good. Apparently the bungee scene was one of my favourites as well. I really liked that. That was very inventive, the way that they did that sort of reverse bungee and everything.
Yeah.
That's cracking. It's a very clever idea. That was obviously the trailer. I'm not really giving anything away there, but it was clever about how they employed that and what it was actually employed for as well.
I'm going to go back to the James Bond comparisons that I just couldn't get away from in this movie. I know Nolan is a massive Bond fan, and you've got like the final act in Inception is like a Bond movie. The beginning of Dark Knight Rises is like Bond 101. This entire movie, from the undercover agent with the quote-unquote code name, or no name in this case, Elizabeth Debicki is the Bond girl. You've got the Russian oligarch supervillain. Even the bit with the scene, you've got the protagonist and they've got the good guy and the bad guy sitting having dinner. It's a very Bond move. It's very suave, it's very cool, it's very understated. And you've got him explaining his master plan as well. It's just like...
Yeah. And the backdrop of an exotic location where there's like yachts and, you know, glitter and nightlife and stuff like that. Yeah, it's very, very Bond-esque. I wondered if Nolan ever would take up the mantle and do a Bond movie.
I mean, it's almost like he's writing love letters to Bond every time. And this, to me, was the first time from beginning to end, the whole thing felt like a Bond movie in many ways. And as much as I'd love to see a Christopher Nolan Bond movie, I don't have to, because I've seen it. I've already seen it.
There's no reason for him to do Bond. He has more freedom doing his own films than he would ever get doing a Bond film. I mean, look at Danny Boyle. Similar sort of outlook in terms of sort of larger budget art house films, and he didn't fit into the Bond mold. He obviously came up against problems when he was trying to develop the film and obviously left it. I don't see Christopher Nolan really wanting to get involved in that. He's got enough power and enough influence in his own that he would just go ahead and do whatever film he wants to do.
That's a very good point. Actually, that he's got more. It's strange that he's got more freedom to make a Bond movie in his own movies than he would do if he was making a Bond movie. And speaking of his own movie, and whether people like this movie or not, it's a blockbuster budget, massive distribution, should be the big film of the summer, basically. It's an original movie. It's not based on a book, it's not based on a comic, it's not based on anything, it's not a remake, it's an original movie, and people are always crying out for these. And Nolan, whether you like him or not, is giving us them. And it's very rare.
It doesn't happen very often. If you look at the number of films that come out over a summer, the majority are remakes, reboots, or sequels. They're the films that tend to put bums in seats, so having something like this is pleasing. It's very interesting. And it has been a hit as well. Obviously, it's not opened in America. I think it's this weekend it opens in America. And it took something like $50 million sort of worldwide in its first weekend, which is pretty good considering cinemas are running at like a quarter capacity.
Yeah.
Mind you, it's on the hour every hour at the local Cineworlds. So
Remember when you were younger, you used to like watch like TV in America, Oh, I shall live in America. Why was I never born in America? See if somebody came to me and said, see, in 30 years' time, you'll get to see Tenet. They won't. Ah, well, fair dues. I'll endure the hardships of the East End of Glasgow until that point.
Do you know, it's interesting though, because the summer programme, as it stood up until obviously all this kicked off, was exactly that. It was comic book movies, it was reboots, it was remakes, it was, you know, your Top Gun, your Mulan, the Fast and Furious sequel, and all that. So it would have been interesting to see it up against all of that type of content, and it's obviously benefiting from the fact that it is the sort of only film, as you say, playing on the hour every hour, and it definitely merits a repeat viewing as well, which I think will help its takings. But it's definitely a film that makes you work hard. Like, there's not a second where you can really sort of drop your concentration and relax. You definitely have to work for it from start to finish. And actually, that was a really enjoyable part of it for me as well, because so much of the stuff that comes out during the summer and there's no harm to it, because I love a big popcorn blockbuster. I was really looking forward to Top Gun and No Time to Die and stuff like that. That's not what I'm saying, but I was enjoying the fact that I was actually having to work really hard at just keeping up with what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, for the last hour of this movie, I really need to go and pee. And do you know, sometimes when you're watching a movie, you can assess when to go. You can go
100%. Yep.
You've seen that many movies. You know the formula, you know the plot. You know where things are going to happen. You can chance it. With this, you couldn't do it. You just couldn't. You couldn't take that chance.
No, there's no let up. If you think about normal blockbusters, you've got at least one sex scene, especially a James Bond film. You've probably got two. and you have a couple of scenes of relief as well. I don't mean that sexually or anything.
I just had you laugh first because I was just like, hold it together.
There are scenes where it brings the audience down so they can come back up again. There's going to be something dramatic happening maybe in the next 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But you don't get that here. It's constant. And you are being fed information as you're going along while you're trying to concentrate on car chases or whatever. So yes, there is no let up. There is no toilet break really in this film at all.
No.
It's lucky you're young, Simmy.
Trying my granny bladder, I need to pee all the time. Like, and these types of films are torture for me. Yeah, what did you guys think of the score? Because I loved it, couldn't get enough of it, and I've read so many like reviews and that people are saying it ruined it for them. It was too loud, which seems like a granny complaint for a film. But I loved the way it sort of punctuated things. It was very like Zimmer-esque, although I know it wasn't him that did it. But I loved it. I thought it was really like different and unusual, and I felt like the score was as challenging as what you were watching, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree, and it was unsettling when it had to be unsettling. I didn't think the score wasn't distracting to me in any way, and I was talking to somebody online about this, and I think it might depend on where you've seen the film. And I think Dunkirk has similar criticisms regarding the sound mixing, and it's to do with they don't mix the sound universally. I'm sure they'll mix it for a certain like speaker system, and most cinemas can't match that, so you're never going to get how it should sound, unfortunately. And that sounds like a weird thing, but I'm sure that's correct. I'm sure I read that. I'm sure Dunkirk was a movie that people complained about.
And yeah, I loved that sound as well, because it did feel like planes were literally flying past you and like bombs were dropping like behind you. I loved the sound in Dunkirk as well. Yeah, I mean, I've read a lot of criticism of all the things to pick up on in this movie. I don't know why the soundtrack is one of them, but I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was quite different, and as you say, like quite invasive when it had to be. I felt like the actual sounds, the percussion or whatever that we're using was really actually making me feel quite nervous and unsettled, which only added to the fact that I probably didn't have a clue what was going on.
And it was a socially distanced composition.
Yeah, that's right. They recorded it in their own houses, didn't they?
Yeah, which is fascinating in itself to pull something like that together.
It's interesting about the sound because obviously I've seen it twice. The first time I saw it in the Odeon version of the IMAX, and the vocals were quite muffled during that, and the soundtrack was right up in your face, which I thought was to get you to concentrate more. You're really sort of keenly listening to what was going on. But the second time I saw it, the vocals seemed to be up in the mix. It was at a completely different cinema. It's one of the View cinemas, and you could hear the vocals a lot clearer. But the soundtrack seemed to be just as loud. It just seemed, as you say, it's different for different cinemas. That kind of explains why. I thought it was just my ears, but obviously not.
I think the coronavirus has been a big, massive viral marketing campaign for this film.
Well, it has made...
Just little shit ever.
Well, think about it. When can you think of another film that has had so much riding on it in terms of expectations? Not even the Avengers films have had this level of scrutiny before anybody actually saw the film.
This was the film that was going to save the summer in terms of cinema, basically, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're hoping for. And I haven't really been checking out the reviews of that, but you're saying it's still be at the box office regardless of the pandemic. I think it's another hit for Nolan, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. It really is. You only have to look at the Guardian to see how they tackled the reviews. They had 3 people reviewing it, for one online, one for the paper, and I think one for the Observer. And it was 3 different reviews, and it was 3 different star ratings. There was a 2, a 3, and a 5, I think it was, that they gave it. And people online were saying, come on, make up your minds. But that's pretty much the nature of the film, and it's pretty much the nature of Nolan's films. They can be quite divisive. You can love a film, and you can be sitting beside somebody who says, well, that was just a big pile of rubbish. I didn't understand it. I didn't want to understand it. It was just terrible. I didn't recognise that nice Aaron Taylor-Johnson at all the way through the film, that kind of idea, which I didn't.
I didn't either. I only when I saw his name in the credits, I was like, who was he? And then I had to go and work out who he'd played. Yeah.
Same, yeah, I was exactly the same. But again, it was another very nice performance. It's one of these films that will leave some people sort of scratching their heads. Dunkirk was the same. If you remember back at that, a lot of people said, nah, didn't enjoy it, didn't get it. What was going on there?
Same with Interstellar, actually. Interstellar had a
No, I
lot
didn't
of
like that.
criticisms. I know you didn't like it. And that's the nature of Nolan's films for the most part. Prestige was like that, Inception. They're challenging. That doesn't mean you're not allowed to like it. I'm not saying that at all. It's just, but they are challenging movies. Even Memento. Because The Dark Knight Rises wasn't the easiest watch for how the story played out. I love the film, don't get me wrong, but that got a lot of criticism as well. I think people are waiting for Nolan to trip up, and he hasn't done it universally yet.
Yeah, I mean, I like his movies. I just, this just isn't my favourite because it really did fall down in the last like 20 to 30 minutes for me. But I really, really enjoyed it up until that point. I was really engaged. I was really paying attention, and I felt like I was following it. But within the last half hour, I was just like, oh, this just undid all of the good stuff that I really enjoyed about the movie up until this point. So for me, it's not my favourite Nolan, but I'm definitely not waiting for him to trip up. I want him, give me more.
Oh, no. I don't mean anybody in this room is. Well, not this room because we're on social distancing in their own houses. I made it sound like we're all recording a podcast to do. They're going to get stormtroopers at the door. And no, I mean, it's but you sometimes can sense that, people love a failure.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt that with a lot of the DC films. And even to the point where DC were releasing good films, people weren't accepting it. And now there seems to be a strange, interesting shift in dynamic now where people are really looking forward to the Batman, the Suicide Squad, Wonder Woman 1984, and they're panning what Marvel's got. People just like to tear something down. They're assholes.
Yeah. Well, if Nolan was going to trip up, he would have tripped up after Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, for sure.
Because that was seen as being, I suppose that was seen as being a high point. And if he was going to go downhill from there, then do something a lot more personal and something that people genuinely wouldn't get. I think it would have happened then, but he's been very solid since then.
Yeah. It's funny because I haven't watched The Prestige or Interstellar since seeing them in the cinema. But for me, it was in the third act those films kind of fell down for me. Not so much here, not with other stuff, but with those two. So maybe he's got a third act problem.
Maybe. just can't seem to finish. Happens to a lot of men, you shouldn't worry. The Prestige is a good movie.
Maybe that's what you're told.
The Prestige is a good movie. I love it. Interstellar, I couldn't get into it. I just didn't care about anyone. I just wanted it to end.
And it did. Yeah. Eventually. But with Tenet, would you recommend it? It's a recommend from me.
Yes, I would definitely recommend it. It's really probably film of the year for me so far, I would say. And I've seen a lot of rubbish, so yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend it. I'm just like, everyone go back to the cinema. Go multiple times.
So that's a universal recommendation for the first pandemic movie? Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah,
as long as people don't actually start making movies about the COVID pandemic, that's that's coming. Yeah.
I also must reiterate that when I say first pandemic movie, the movie's not about COVID. I know I've made a few clues. I've mentioned about the COVID viral marketing campaign and that. This movie's not about COVID. I have not just spoiled it for you. Please don't send hate mail to me any more than you usually do. Now, this is a slightly spoilery aspect. What we're going to talk about next, we're going to talk about our favourite top 3 movies with non-linear plots. Although, I would argue Tenet does, in its own way, have a linear plot. It's just not presented chronologically. And that's as much as I'm going to say about it because I don't want to get into the weeds and we'll start discussing the finer parts of the plot. But maybe we should do that offline because I'm quite curious to have this conversation. But we're going to discuss our top 3 movies with non-linear plots. And I believe I'm up first. Is that correct?
It is.
Excellent. I'll go first. I always seem to be last for some reason. Feels that way. Starting to get complex.
A complex about finishing last? Okay.
John, he's finally come down to our level. It's dark down here. Welcome.
Come out of the gutter, Rose.
Yeah, it smells a bit, but it's okay.
My first pick is the 2002 black comedy The Rules of Attraction, directed by Roger Avary and based on Bret Easton Ellis's book of the same name. This movie stars James Van Der Beek, Shannon Sossamon, Ian Somerhalder, Jessica Biel, and Kate Bosworth in roles that none of them ever did before and have really done since. This is a movie about a love triangle. You've got Van Der Beek, Sossamon, and Somerhalder all intertwined in this kind of love triangle. And although the movie was marketed like a teen comedy, it is the anti-teen comedy. The movie is dark. It's violent. It's really, really funny, but it's ultimately tragic, and it's a hard watch at times. In terms of a non-linear plot, this movie starts off at the beginning, and the rest of the movie is told almost like a flashback, except it doesn't really have a flashback style device. It goes beyond that. It starts at the end and basically tells you everything that's going to happen to these characters, and then rewinds time, then goes to the beginning to when they all started their relationships. And even from then on, although it's kind of linear, it jumps. There's massive gaps in the relationships of what happens. And the director said he did this deliberately because he wanted to show gaps in what was happening, because college life is like that. People remember it and go, I remember that. There's always things missing. All three characters as well, they're unreliable narrators. You're not really too sure who's telling the truth. And there's even one scene where two different versions of what's going on are told side by side, and you're not sure what version is real. It's a very fascinating movie, how it's done. And even when you get to the end of the movie and it replays what happened at the beginning, it's not the same. It's a different ending. Like almost like, here's what we've tried, it's not worked, let's rewind and do something different because this is a bad idea. It's a very clever movie. I don't think it gets enough love. It didn't get good reviews when it came out. I don't think it done great at the box office, but it became more of a cult movie in time. It's very infamous as well for a scene where the character Victor is called his European trip, and it's like a 5-minute montage of this character's trip across Europe. And the director even wanted to make all that footage in a movie itself, but legally could not release it, which I think is pretty nuts. He wanted to base it on another Bret Easton Ellis book called Glitterati, but he said he could never get consent forms to people who were in it because he basically just followed the actor in character 24/7 through nightclubs and picking people up and going to the pub and getting steaming and waking up hungover and going to hash bars in Amsterdam. And it's incredible that this scene was shot. It took ages to shoot and takes like 5 minutes of the movie, and that is told really quickly and really fast cuts and really adds to that non-linear narrative of the film. Have either of you seen it?
No, I've read the book. I'm a big Bret Easton Ellis fan. I love his books. They are really, really just get under your skin and really fuck with your head for days. But I think I'm a victim of bad marketing because I just assumed this was like a wee teeny bopper movie when it came out. I didn't realise it was based on that book. So I now will go and watch it because I love Bret Easton Ellis, but I know the storyline, obviously. But no, I would give it a watch. I obviously thought it was a different movie to the book.
You seen it, John?
I hadn't, but in preparation for this, I gave it a watch because it's on Amazon Prime just now.
Spot.
I know, such a spot. I really liked the mechanics of it. I thought that was very well done, the way that the story starts at the end and then goes back and then goes back another bit and back and forward. But I hated every single character in the film. I thought they were insufferable, absolutely insufferable, but not because of the way that they were portrayed by the actors. I just thought the characterization of them all, they were all just, they were nothing like real people at all in any way, not even like college students or anything. And within about 10 minutes, I was ready to throw something at the screen because it was just infuriating. It just really was. I don't know if it's an age thing or what, but I was just like, oh my God, this is so annoying. But the story itself was good, but that kind of put me off a wee bit. But yes, I did enjoy it to a certain extent, but I didn't really get as much enjoyment as you obviously did from it.
I love this movie. It's one of my favourite films of all time. And interest in Mary, if it helps any, Bret Easton Ellis likes this movie because he's not the biggest fan. Yeah, he's not the biggest fan of a lot of his adapted works, but he thinks the director really kind of nailed the essence of this. And it's got differences to the book as well that means it's not just going to be a rehash. So I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, no, I mean, as I say, I love his writing. His writing is like really distinct, and you know you're reading a Bret Easton Ellis book. So I mean, yeah, I would give it a go.
My first choice is the 1994 Quentin Tarantino classic Pulp Fiction, which was, in a nice twist, conceived by Tarantino and the director of Rules of Attraction, Roger Avery, as well. Stars John Travolta, Samuel L. Jackson, Bruce Willis, Tim Roth, Ving Rhames, Uma Thurman, and plenty of other folk as well. It tells 3, maybe 4 stories. I think it's basically, there's basically 6 or 7 elements to it, and the film is told in a very non-linear way, but all the stories link up and the characters jump back and forward between the various elements of the stories. You've got the hitman story in the diner, you've got the boxer who's trying to get away, you've got all sorts of other elements. You've got Vincent, who has to take out the wife of the local mobster, Marcellus Wallace, I believe his name is. And it's all the stories around that. And it's obviously very hip, very cool. And it's just a fantastic piece of screenwriting. And it works so well. And even now it stands up, which is understandable given the quality of the people involved and the fact that it's Tarantino totally behind it as well. It's one of these things that I thought of immediately when we started talking about non-linear movies. Now, you both have seen this.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
No, I said imagine I hadn't, of course. I fucking seen
Oh,
Yeah, I mean,
That was my Halloween costume for this year. Or
that's
last
what
year.
right? Yeah, but that doesn't mean anything. You might have just been seen that. I mean, for me, this is the first movie I've seen like this, with this kind of narrative technique. It might be the same for a lot of people as well, to be fair. And when I first watched it, I didn't see the film from start to finish. I seen segments of it. So was still able to follow what was going on. And then I remember sitting watching from start to finish and going, why is it doing this? I just didn't understand why it was doing it at first, but that's brilliant. So that's a brilliant film. And as you say, it's just so utterly cool and suave in how it's done. It's a cracking film.
It's very slick, and it's very sort of, when I saw Inglourious Bastards, I felt like there was really strong elements of Pulp Fiction in that as well, just the way that that's told and the sort of use of music and stuff like that. But I don't think you'll ever get anything as cool as Pulp Fiction. It really is the sort of epitome of like really fucking cool movie making.
he has gone back to that well a few times and used sort of a non-linear narrative in some of his other films, not to the same extent as he did in Pulp Fiction. And he has been accused of overusing it, but it's part of his storytelling technique. It works well.
Yeah, I mean, Reservoir Dogs had it before Pulp Fiction. I mean, they went and wrote True Romance. They wanted True Romance to be done the way Pulp Fiction is, and Tony Scott said, nah.
Oh, really? Interesting. So I am going for Gaspar Noé's 2002 movie Irreversible, which I know we've spoken about before, but to me this was the most obvious example of non-linear narrative, because it's like The Nightmare told in reverse. It uses structure, a narrative structure, really, really well, because it's actually sort of demonstrating how cruel time is, because the movie opens with, Vincent Cassel, beating the shit out of somebody with a fire extinguisher, and you're like, why are we starting here? But actually that isn't even the worst part of the movie. And it's a film that really plays with time, in the sense that you're aware that you have a lack of control when it comes to linearity or whatever. And obviously the kind of infamous rape scene that takes place sort of smack bang in the middle of the movie, it feels like time stands still. It just goes on and on and on, whereas other parts of the film are more punchy and more sort of fast paced. This just seems to take up way more screen time than the 8 or 9 minutes that it is. And obviously by the time you get to the end of the movie and you're seeing sort of happier scenes and, Vincent Cassel and Monica Bellucci's characters together, it doesn't matter, because your head's already fucked. You've seen the damage that's about to come, so you can't even take pleasure in those moments, because you know exactly the consequences of, their night out. It's a film that I think uses time really, really effectively in terms of actual just pacing, in terms of fast and slow throughout the film, and that's sort of contributed to by the soundtrack. But it's a film that really, really destroys your sort of sense of, I think control is the big thing for me, sense of control, because it's one of those things where, every action has consequences, or every action has a reaction, that sort of thing, and you're just seeing the conclusion of it and working your way back. And it's a film that totally grinds you down, but it's so well executed, so well done. and honestly has to be one of the best made movies of all time, despite the fact that it is a really difficult watch. I think in terms of if you're interested in structure and, you know, sort of playing around with narrative, this has to be a go-to movie. I think it's one of the best that Noah's made, and actually just is one of the best movies to ever be made, not to jump it up too much, but I think it's a perfect example of playing with time, but also playing with your head, and I think that's what Nolan tries to do with Tenet as well, and I think that it's just it's a hard watch, but definitely a worthwhile one. I assume you guys have both seen it, yeah?
Yeah, but I had this in my movies only to watch once, unless, as you say, the way the plot's told, the reverse chronology, it's not just as simple as taking a movie and telling it backwards. The way the film is written and then presented, it's the impact it has on how he does it. Because if you watch that film forwards, it wouldn't make as much sense. It wouldn't have the same impact. You wouldn't feel the same ups and downs with it. But yeah, stunning movie in terms of technical point of view, from a technical point of view.
Yep, still not seen it from our last discussion either. I will get to it at some point, but in a way, the discussions that we've been having, it's kind of put me off watching it, to be honest, because of the brutality within the film. But like you say,
it's up
if
there
it
with
was
The
one
Nightingale, which you've seen. It's up there with that in terms
I
of
have it on my list.
unwatchability.
so you're not going to go out and buy the T-shirt or anything anytime soon.
Well, my next link actually does follow in quite nicely for yours, Mary, and I'm going to go with Nolan's first feature movie, Memento. And when I first heard of Irreversible, people spoke about it in the same breath as they mentioned Memento because both movies had a reverse chronology. But I remember there's one review that went and said the difference in Irreversible and Memento is Irreversible didn't do it as a gimmick. Memento clearly does. You've got the character played by Guy Pearce who has a really severe brain injury that means that he can't form new memories. So his movie's been told backwards. It's a very interesting plot device because you've seen his memory in reverse. He can't remember anything after a few minutes. So we're getting told his past through the plot of the movie. But you've also, the main story is getting told backwards. You've got another story that's getting told forwards, and both of them are parallel with each other. And it's basically a film noir murder mystery where Guy Pearce's characters try to find out who murdered his wife. And the movie starts off with a murder, and you kind of think, oh, there's this guy. Quite similar to Reversible in that way. And then the time you get to the end of Memento, which I thought was quite a shocking ending, it all makes sense, it all ties up nicely, and it's a film with a lot of rewatchability factor as well, based on how clever it's told. There's also a feature in one of the DVDs, a hidden Easter egg, we can watch the movie forwards. I haven't done this.
Ooh.
And it'd be interesting from a merit point of view, because I think for the most part it would work as a standalone the thriller detective story, but you would lose a lot obviously with the way it's told backwards. This is a cracking film, seen it so many times. Big fan of Guy Pearce, is great in this, and an early indication of what Nolan has in store going forward. You've both seen it?
Yes, yeah, it was the film that really introduced me to Christopher Nolan. I have watched the Easter egg version of it on the DVD where it plays it forward, and it doesn't have the same impact at all because it's still a good story, but it doesn't have the same build-up, if you like, because of the fact that it's constructed in such a way that you're going backwards from the end to the start, and that's what makes the film. So when you do it the other way, it doesn't quite work in the same way, but it's still a reasonably good film. I thought it was a cracking film when I watched it. It really is one of these mind-blowing films that you don't get very often, and as you say, which Nolan tends to specialise in.
Yeah, it's a film I've got on DVD. I've seen it a good few times, but I haven't watched it in a while. I need to get out and watch it again because, yeah, it's a great film.
Yeah, I watched it as part of non-linear narrative week at uni, so that fits in really well. That was the first movie I ever saw Guy Pearce in, actually, which I know, which is a shame because he's got loads of good movies, but it was the first movie I saw that, but I loved it. I remember sitting, it was like a rainy Tuesday because we had our screenings from 5:30 to 7:30, sitting watching it, and my head was just like, by the time it was done. I loved it the first time I saw it. It was really good.
Yeah, you see him like standing in front of the mirror and he's got all the tattoos or the clues of his wife's killer all over him, and yeah, very, very clever movie. And unlike the kind of movies Nolan would go on to make sense, not a massive budget here. You know, it's all about the story. And again, though, you can see even with a small budget, the techniques he can employ as a director. He was always going to go for that kid.
Did you call it at the time? Yeah.
good, aye. Watching that film going, but I don't know watching the following actually. This guy's going to be good. That film, though, isn't great, but hey ho, we all need to start somewhere. Go on, what's your next pick? It's you, John, isn't it?
It is, yes. My second pick is the 2016 film Arrival, which comes from director Denis Villeneuve and stars Amy Adams, Jeremy Renner, and Forrest Whitaker. It is the story of 12 spaceships landing in various locations on Earth and the human population's attempts to try and communicate the occupants of the ships. They try and do various things as a world. There is various countries that join up together and try and work out, and the American one is led by a linguist, who's the Amy Adams character. She is trying to make some sort of contact with the aliens, which are called heptapods. Now, this doesn't sound like it's anything to do with a non-linear narrative at all, and you don't think that when you're actually watching it. There are a few clues in there if you watch it carefully. There's a lot of palindromes involved in it, but it's only when you get maybe about 2/3 of the way into the film that you realise that there is a non-linear aspect to the story. That is partly down to the fact that we are so conditioned by the information that we are presented in films that we take it as read. We realise that certain things are put on screen to give us certain information and make us think in a certain way. Now, what the filmmakers do here is they start off with almost a statement, and you accept that, and from there on you accept everything that's going on. But it's only later on when things are actually explained to you that you realise that basically they've been fucking with you all the way through the film. And it makes for such a good movie, and it's such a good feeling when you actually figure out what's actually going on. And it's unusual in movies. You don't get a lot of films that are like that, and it works really well. And because of that, the film is just absolutely fantastic. I do take it you've both seen this.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah,
I am not.
Villeneuve, as far as I'm concerned, is a genius. Oh, what?
I am not a fan of this film. I thought it was so incredibly overhyped and overrated that I couldn't believe I'd seen the same film. I was discussing it with people, and everybody talks about the ending. It's been this work of genius, and it's so clever, and it's this great twist, but it's essentially the same ending as Bill and Ted, which was did for comedic effect, and they do it as a serious narrative plot device. I mean, it's the exact same ending.
True, actually. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it in that way, but it's true, but it doesn't detract for me.
That wasn't the thing that detracted for me. I just
Nor
thought
me.
I just thought it was dull overall. But yeah, when the ending happened, I was sitting there cinema going, I've seen this ending before. Yeah, not a fan of this movie.
Oh, you're kidding. I don't think that Villeneuve's made a bad movie. I think he's up there with Nolan as just being like world class.
Blade Runner was dull as well.
Okay, I think
first Blade Runner is incredibly boring, so
I think we've got a whole podcast worth of discussion right there, just in those two statements, my friend. Right, so, Mary.
He's getting cancelled for different reasons this week. Yep. My next pick, because I'm feeling very cultured this week, is the 2016 Pedro Almodovar film Julieta. It stars Emma Suarez and Adriana Ugarte, hope I'm saying that correctly, as older and younger versions of Julieta. It's very female-centric in typical Almodovar style, and it basically is a story that's kind of told in flashback. And what I'm going to describe in the next few sentences is going to sound really shit and really cheesy, but it's not. So the older Julieta decides to sort of track down her daughter, who'd been missing for 12 years after a trip to a sort of religious camp, and she starts sort of looking back on her journals and starts, putting entries in her diary, and then it starts to tell the story in flashback of various childhood traumas and how their relationship broke down. That sounds rubbish, and it sounds like she's sitting there going, "Dear diary, today my daughter ran away. I am very sad." It's definitely not like that. And Almodovar uses these two sort of conflicting narratives to actually demonstrate Julieta's decline into depression, because as the movie goes on and the colour starts to fade, which is a bizarre experience for a Almodovar film because they're usually so decline and this bleak and sort of unflinching look at what it's like to be dealing with mental health issues and the breakdown of this mother-daughter relationship. It's kind of similar to irreversible in the sense that, you know, you sort of see the consequences of the actions before you see the actions. But it's a really well crafted, really unusual movie, I think, for Almodovar, although it is, you know, very female heavy and very, you know, focuses on themes of, you know, family and love and life. It's quite bleak, it's quite dark, and as I say, the colour starts to drain from it, which is quite an unusual experience. But it's, you know, there's moments of black humour, there's, you know, kind of typical mother-daughter sort of button heads type of thing. It's just a really interesting watch, and I loved it. I got it on DVD a couple of years ago, and it's, again, he's a filmmaker for me who can do no wrong, and I think this is a really, really good movie of his. Have you guys seen it at all?
I have not.
I have. I think it was my film of the year in 2016. I absolutely love
Yeah.
this movie. So I think it opened the Glasgow Film Festival that year, and
Oh, did
I
it?
didn't know what to expect from it because I hadn't really read up on anything beforehand, and I was just totally blown away by it. I loved every single minute that those characters were on screen. Yeah, the fade was quite a strange thing in one of his films. I do totally agree with that. But yeah, I just love this movie. I'm a big Almodovar fan anyway. I've got quite a number of his movies sitting, and I've been meaning to have a wee bit of a marathon for a wee while now. But that's a fantastic choice.
Thanks, guys. I'm flattered.
Well done in that movie, you picked movie.
Gonna get a wee gold star for my t-shirt later.
You did your job and you did it well.
Sammy, you up again?
Yeah, my third pick is a film that I didn't even know had an non-linear narrative until I was watching it, and I went with David Fincher's Social Network. This is a movie that you don't even really think about not having a non-linear narrative, but it starts off and you've got the story of Mark Zuckerberg, played by Jesse Eisenberg, at university, pals with Andrew Garfield, and basically create Facebook. But then the movie, without much warning, flash forwards in the future where Zuckerberg's been sued, and there's two different depositions happening. There's one with him and the Winklevoss twins, both played by Arnie Hammer, which I didn't realise was one person until the movie was finished. I thought it was incredible how it was done. And also on another scene, Andrew Garfield is suing him. So clearly both these scenes can't be happening at the same time. So they're different timelines. And then the rest of the story is told in almost like a flashback, except it's not a flashback because it's not done that's not the technique used, because it starts off with this is the present time, oh wait, no, here's what's happened to him, now here's the present time, but both these events are happening, and then it goes back and it all intertwines wonderfully to just show how, and I'm talking about in terms of the plot in the movie, the fictional Mark Zuckerberg, in case he's listening, which let's be honest he is, how he managed to devise and create Facebook but freeze people out. Or did he? Because he's also quite sympathetically shown as well, and this is done not just with the deposition scenes, there's flashbacks to show, was he the villain, was he not? And the whole movie's just expertly constructed, in my opinion, and when it ends, the movie doesn't flash back to end, it stays in that now new present time. And I just thought the film was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And like I said, it's not a film that employs that technique cheaply in any way. It's not a marketing technique, it's not used, you don't even notice it until you're watching it, and even looking your face in, Mary, you probably even think about it at first.
No, I didn't.
You seen it, John?
I have, yeah, I really like it. The premise of it, you've got to wonder how it ever got made in the first place, because obviously David Fincher went and said, I want to make a film about the founding of Facebook. You say, well, that's an app. So, yeah, but, you know, it'll be really interesting. But it's the way that they did it, that they focused not on the actual physicality of actually putting together an app and getting it out there. It was everything surrounding it. It was all the personalities that were involved in it. And like I say, it was based around the two court cases and based around the initial setup. So it was done very well, and it relied on the performances to set it alight rather than the story itself, because the story itself could have been quite dry.
Yeah.
But when you have a combination of the actors in place and Fincher directing them, who by all accounts is a very analytical director, he likes to do a lot of takes, he likes to get it right, he likes to have a lot of coverage for everything that he does. So he spends an awful lot of time going over and over things. So, and you can see that in the finished product because it's just so precise, and it works really, really well.
Yeah, you've also got the script by Aaron Sorkin as well, so you've got this really clever dialogue. And as you're saying, John, it's a film about a Facebook app, about an app basically, the story behind it. Most of the movie for all intents and purposes, is fairly fictional, and it doesn't matter because it's not supposed to be a biographical true story. It's the fiction in this case is a lot more interesting because it makes a more complete story, and it's just I thought I love this film. I think it's one of Fincher's most underrated movies. So
Yeah,
effective.
it's another film where the wordiness of it means you have to like sit up and focus and pay attention, and you're trying to keep up with different conversations that are spinning. You're trying to remember if they're in the same timeline. Now that you've mentioned it, you're like, has that happened before that or whatever? It's really, it's a brilliant movie.
The score as well by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. The score of this movie is absolutely brilliant. I went and bought it in CD. You can just listen to it like an album. It's great.
Showing your age, buying things on CD.
Oh, this movie's 10 years old already.
Actually,
It's crazy, isn't it?
you know, we started watching The Wire as an aside, and I was like, God, this looks really dated. And I was like, oh yeah, 2002 was like 20 years ago. In my head, it was like 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, I was watching Sopranos during my rewatch, and it was the 90s that started.
Yeah, I was a child.
So I was at school. God, the next.
Right, so my last choice is the film Amores Perros from 2000 by Alejandro González Iñárritu, and it is 3 stories that are linked by a car accident. The various stories come together in this accident, but they don't come together. It's not the end of each story. Like, for instance, there's a story where there's a young guy who is involved in dogfighting, and at the very beginning of the film, you're focused on this character as he's driving away with this dog sitting in the back of the car that's been shot, and he's trying to get away from some other bad guys that are trying to basically kill them. That flashes back then to the start of that story and tells that story up until the point where there's a car accident. There's a second story about a supermodel who has some problems with her boyfriend. He is already married and everything, and the car accident for them is quite near the beginning of the story. And there's a third story as well, which is an old, well, he's an old Jakey basically, but he actually turns out to be this hitman who was put away for years, and he's got a whole complicated backstory with his family. They thought he was dead, and he's working part-time for the police, but most of the time he just wanders about the streets with a pack of dogs that he has. And all these stories intertwine. There's various wee elements within each separate story where you see other characters sort of dropping in, and they don't have very much to do with that particular story, but it advances the story in certain ways. And it just comes together beautifully in this film that is over 2.5 hours long, which feels, in the face of it, to be quite long, but it really goes in really, really quick. I watched it again last week in prep for this and just fell in love with the film all over again. There's 3 different stories, as I said, and the 3 stories have got slightly different music. They're filmed in slightly different ways. It's sort of, the first film has a lot of handheld stuff. The second one's more sort of static shots. The third is a bit of a mixture. So there's differences in the way that they've approached each of the various elements of it, and it works really, really well. Have you guys seen this?
Do you know, I haven't seen it, and I just had a quick Google search there because the director's name sounded familiar, and I'm not talking about film, he's more kind of recent stuff. It was 21 Grams, was Final Job, which I have seen, which also has a very similar structure to the movie,
Yes.
as does Babel, I believe, as well.
It's a bit of a trilogy, actually, that he's kind of thrown together. It's a bit of a loose trilogy.
Yeah, he's non-linear.
Yes,
But you know, it was funny because you're speaking about that where I could swear I have seen it, but it wasn't. It's 21 Grams I've seen, and I know the plot's different, but the style of the movie is still very similar.
I love this movie, and John, you picked me to the post by picking it. I think it's an incredible piece of cinema. I'm glad that you did pick it so that we could talk about it. It's such a good movie. So my last pick is slightly more recent and slightly more mainstream than John's art house pick, and it is Drew Goddard's 2018 Bad Times at the El Royale. I love this movie, and Sammy, like what you were saying earlier about Tenet being an original, fresh piece of a cinema, this absolutely is as well. It's kind of Tarantino-esque in its use of sort of title cards and music and sort of fades in and out. And it's kind of got sort of 2 gimmicks going on for it. So it's a movie set in one location, and it's also got this sort of multi-stranded narrative and the non-linear part of it as well. So you've got a kind of whole host of characters turn up at this hotel, which sits on the dividing line between California and Nevada. You get Jeff Bridges as Father Flynn, and you've got John Hamm as the cheesy vacuum salesman, and then you've got the singer, Cynthia Erivo, and then later on in the movie, Chris Hemsworth turns up as this sort of Manson-esque hippie serial killer druggy kind of guy. But basically the story is told by sort of going into each hotel room and finding out the backstory of each character. And I kind of loved it because it was almost like an episode of Columbo. You kind of knew what was happening and then you got to the story behind it afterwards. And it sort of keeps you guessing as to why these people have turned up at this location, which is obviously abandoned. You know, what's their backstory? How have they ended up here? How are they interacting with each other? And it's a movie that I think kind of keeps you guessing because, again, you're never really sure when you're being told each individual story, is that the truth? Because none of them seem particularly reliable just in their behaviour and the sort of, you know, shifty glances to camera sort of thing. I thought it was a really fresh piece of content. I loved Chris Hemsworth rocking up at the end and just kind of stealing the show. And I just thought it was a very clever, very fast pace, and it makes you work. You are trying to sort of piece everything together. It does feel like a giant game of Cluedo at times, but it's just a really clever, unusual and fresh piece of cinema, and I absolutely loved it. I take it you guys have both seen this. It was out really recently.
Yeah, I went to see this in cinema, and I agree with that. I enjoyed this movie a lot. And as you say, Chris Hemsworth just completely steals the show. He's so good as that kind of cult leader style role. And the way he kind of walks about in the kind of rain with his head down and his shirt open, you can see why people flock to the cult. He's a lot better than Charles Manson, let's be honest. Yes, a cracking film. Very interesting pick as well, especially with something more kind of recent and a very underrated movie. I don't think this got as much love as it really should have.
I don't think so. I think it performed well, but not like tremendously, and I think it kind of flew under the radar for a lot of people. But it's definitely, if you haven't seen it, I would recommend seeking it out. It's a really, really clever piece of cinema.
Yeah, it's almost like a modern noir film, really, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
With the way that they rock up to the hotel, and it's right on the border between California and Nevada, and it's there for a reason because they were able to gamble in Nevada, but they weren't able to gamble in California. It's a very good premise, and then obviously you take it from that with the various rooms and everything and all the stories behind it. Yeah, it works really, really well.
I feel like I've made good picks today.
Yeah,
and a gold star.
You've got good picks. We've actually seen the films and vice versa.
I know, what a day to be alive.
Yep, that's our top 3 picks regarding non-linear storylines in movies. Please let us know yours. There's plenty more to choose from. I was surprised how many there was that I'd seen when I started doing some kind of research. And there was some I'd like to have picked, like you had Doug Liman's Go, Oculus, but there were movies I hadn't seen in so long that I just wasn't too familiar with. But some cracking ones out there. Please let us know yours on the social media, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. You can find us at Moviescramble. You can email us at, actually you can't say email at Moviescramble at. It doesn't make any sense. John.
Work in the email.
You can send us an email at moviescramble.co.uk. Sorry, that's wrong as well, isn't it? We can be contacted at podcast@moviescramble.co.uk.
Do you know where I'm falling down here? I used to always say you can contact John. I used to always have the email just John for some reason. And I thought, that's a bit harsh, actually. It should be, urge your contacting, but you can't say contact us at Moviescramble. That doesn't make any sense. Neither you work for the ampersand. That's what I'm going to say. Moviescramble ampersand.
It's not an ampersand. An ampersand's the and
It
thing.
is. Which, the AOL that used that as a symbol.
Yeah, I think so. Back in. Yeah.
It was,
Just
yeah.
email us. Don't email that. Contact us in Twitter.
None of us can fucking see an email address.
We hope you enjoyed the podcast and let us know your thoughts on the movies discussed, but also in Tenet, because, yeah, as much as successful as this movie's been, I think it is going to be very, very divisive. But if you haven't liked it, go and watch it again. What else are you up to? Especially if you live in certain local authority areas in Scotland, there's not really much you can do. Thanks very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode and take care.
Bye.